This is the second lecture for biodiversity and conservation. For this lecture, we are going to talk about the importance of biodiversity. So you need to be able to identify the three types of biodiversity. And by that, I mean that you should be able to explain what they are. I also want you to be able to explain why biodiversity is important for human health, agriculture, and food sources. And then you need to be able to provide an example for each of these. So first of all, biodiversity in a general sense refers to variety, to biological variety. And you may think of it in terms of the number of different species on Earth, because that is how we usually discuss biodiversity. And that is one of the ways that it is measured. So species diversity, and that's in the middle of my image here. So the number and variety of species in the world or in a particular area. So in the public media, that is generally what people are talking about when they say that we are experiencing a loss in biodiversity. The second type of biodiversity is genetic. And what that refers to is the differences or variation in organisms within a population. So we talked about natural selection and evolution, and natural selection depends on genetic diversity. So you have to think to yourself, why is it important that a population be able to go through natural selection? So think about these frogs in the picture here, right? There's variation in their DNA in terms of they have the same genes, but maybe they have different variations on that gene, right? Just like we talked about with the beetles. Some beetles are green, some beetles are brown. They all have the gene for shell color, but they have different variations of that gene. So that is important if an environment changes. So let's say we have these frogs and they blend into their very green surroundings, and all of a sudden there's a drought and a lot of the plants die. All of a sudden these frogs are no longer camouflaged, so they will be easy to prey on. But if you have a population of frogs where a lot of them are green, but you have a few of them that are like a brownish color, when the environment changes, those brown frogs will then increase in number over many generations, right? So that species of frog can survive through this environmental change. But if all of your frogs are green, they will all die out. And that is how a species goes extinct or becomes extinct. So genetic diversity is important, particularly in the face of environmental change, which is what's happening on a large scale now. The other type of biodiversity is ecosystem diversity. So you can see that on the right side of the image. And what that means is the number and variety of ecosystems within a region or actually on Earth. So when you think of the entire planet, we have so many different types of ecosystems. We have rainforests, we have deciduous forests, which means like forests with trees that lose their leaves in the winter. We have the Arctic, so a landscape that has a lot of snow in it. We have the desert, all of these different ecosystems. And each ecosystem has specific organisms that live within that ecosystem. So when we lose one, like for instance, in North America, we used to have a lot of grassland or prairies. And most of that ecosystem has been lost because we use those areas for agriculture. So the organisms that lived in these prairies no longer have a place to live. So we are losing biodiversity. So what I want you to see here is these are all related: ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity. If you lose one, you're going to lose the others. And so that is why we talk about biodiversity in terms of these three types. Now, I didn't put a lot of details on this slide about why biodiversity is important, but you can go to your textbook to get more detail. So now that you know how we look at biodiversity, why should we even care, right? Why should we care if we lose a few species here or there, or if we lose the prairies? Well, biodiversity impacts all of these areas of life. So human health. We have found that mental health is seriously impacted when people do not have access to nature. It also affects the type of medicine that we have. So a lot of our medications we manufacture synthetically, but they are based on chemicals that we found in the rainforest, for instance. So they come from plants. We have medications that come from insects and a variety of different organisms. So as we lose these regions, like the rainforest is being cut down, we lose the potential to discover new chemicals to use for medication. Now, under human health, it also says ecosystem services. Now, ecosystem services are things like the ability of soil to filter pollutants out of water. Okay, they are natural processes that we rely on for our existence. Another ecosystem service would be pollination. Without pollination, we lose a lot of food that we now depend on. So approximately 30% of your diet depends on pollination. So pollinators, bees primarily, taking pollen from one plant, putting it on another of the same species. That creates fruit, which disperses seeds. So we depend on pollination for 30% of our food. Now, biodiversity is important for agriculture. So this picture that I put here are all the different varieties of corn. So corn originated in Mexico. These are what we call land races or naturally occurring corn varieties. Now, a lot of these varieties are being lost. So here in North America, we only grow one type of corn. So what is the problem with that? Well, there are many, many pathogens and pests that attack crops, right? We have all different kinds of moths and butterflies that lay their eggs, which turn into larvae and then eat the plants. There are viruses that affect plants, all kinds of different pathogens. So if you have only one type of corn, if a pathogen starts to infect that corn, you are going to lose most of the corn that you're growing in North America. Now, when you have a variety of corn, like you see in the picture, there are going to be some strains that are resistant to these pathogens. So even though like a virus or pests are coming into your crops, if you have some that are resistant, you can continue to produce food. So as we lose that diversity, we jeopardize our food sources. Now, the next one is food source, and I put fisheries, plants, fruit. So what I'm showing you here, obviously, is netting fish. And what's happening with the fisheries is exploitation to the extent that we are losing a lot of fish species in the ocean. So that is going to limit our ability to use fish as a food source. When plants become extinct, we are also jeopardizing what we can use for crops. So the importance of biodiversity is that it supports human health, like mental health, aesthetics, things like that. It impacts agriculture. Okay, we lose the ability to keep producing food if they are infected by pathogens and pests like caterpillars. It's also important for food sources because we rely on a variety of different organisms that we can consume. So the next lecture video that I will make is on the threats to biodiversity.